Chapter 7. The family you never knew. 4-year-old Colton Burpo had a brush with death and claimed to visit heaven. Several months later, he and his dad, Todd, were driving across the Nebraska cornfields. Colton asked his dad if he had a grandpa named Pop. Todd said he did and told Colton that Pop had passed away when Todd was about Colton's age. Colton replied, "He's really nice." Todd almost drove off the road. He later relates, "It's a crazy moment when your son uses the present tense to refer to someone who died a quarter century before he was even born." As Todd and Colton continued to talk, Colton explained that he not only met Pop in heaven, but he got to stay with him. Not long after they got back from their road trip, Todd pulled out the last picture of Pop he had. Pop was 62, with white hair and glasses. Todd asked if Colton recognized him. Colton squinched up his face, shook his head, and said, "Dad, nobody's old in heaven, and nobody wears glasses." It bothered Todd that Colton didn't recognize Pop, so he had his mom send a younger picture of Pop when he was 29, standing with his wife, Colton's great-grandmother, and 2 other people. He showed it to Colton, who said, "Hey, how did you get a picture of Pop?" To Colton's great-grandmother, whom Colton had recently seen, now in her 80s, was also pictured next to Pop. Colton didn't recognize his great-grandmother in her 20s, yet he recognized his 29-year-old great-grandfather he'd never met. Later that October, Colton gave his family another surprise as they were all gathered in the living room working on different projects. "Mommy, I have 2 sisters," Colton said. His mom, Sonia, corrected him, reminding him he only had 1 sister. Colton repeated himself, insisting that he had 2 sisters. Sonia replied that Cassie is his only sister, and then asked if he meant his cousin, Tracy. "No," Colton insisted adamantly. "I have 2 sisters." "You had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you?" Time stopped in the Burpo house. Shocked, Sonia asked her son, who told him that she had a baby die in her tummy. "She did, Mommy," Colton explained. "She said she died in your tummy." Sonia was overcome with emotion. They had never told Colton about the miscarriage. "It's okay, Mommy," Colton said. "God adopted her." Todd said he could hear the effort it took for Sonia to steady her voice as she asked Colton what his sister looked like. Colton explained that in heaven, a girl who looked a lot like Cassie, but with dark hair, ran up to him and wouldn't stop hugging him. He clearly didn't like a girl hugging him so much. Sonia asked him what her name was. "She doesn't have a name. You guys didn't name her." "You're right, Colton," Sonia said, dumbfounded. "We didn't even know she was a she." Colton said, "Yeah, she said she just can't wait for you and Daddy to get to heaven." King David lost his infant son at birth. He had fasted, prayed, wept, and wailed for healing, but when his son died, he stopped. His friends were confused. David explained, "Why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me." 2 Samuel 12 verse 23 NLT. David knew he would see his son again in heaven. Imagine all the family hurts and pains, finally redeemed by the love of God. Imagine all the little babies, finally reunited with their families, all the brothers and sisters, moms and dads, grandparents and even distant relatives, joined together as a family inside God's great family. That's what God is doing, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory. It was fitting that God should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Hebrews 2 verses 10 to 11. Imagine this new family of families God has in store for all who love him. Imagine meeting relatives from hundreds of years past, joined as this family you never knew. But that brings up other relational questions, like what age will we be? And how will there not be sibling rivalry and family feuds? Ageless ages, what age will we be in heaven? The more I've pondered what the scriptures say and what the NDRs report, it's unclear. My best theory is that we will be ageless, yet we will have the ability to appear to others as the age they knew us best. I say this as a theory, because scripture seems silent on the topic, though it does tell us time in heaven doesn't work like it does on earth. With the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. 2 Peter 3 verse 8. Listen to some of the things NDRs note about age. From some accounts, people appear to be all ages. Gary Wood said as he walked through the city with his best friend, John, "I saw a playground with children and teenagers, those who died prematurely." At another point he saw his grandmother and grandfather sitting on the front porch of a 3-story house, talking to people walking by, but he was not allowed to talk to them for some reason. For Marv, the bank president, noticed outside the city gate, most of the men in line were between 50 and 70 years of age, and most of the women were between 70 and 90 years of age. There were 3 children in line, each of them around 4 or 5 years of age. These little ones were not standing still, but moving around, wiggling in their spots in line, like children do. They all had big smiles on their faces. An Indian man was carrying a tiny baby for a young Indian woman standing in front of him. 5 Marv came to a barrier, which we will see is common, that he could not cross. He described it as a crystalline barrier, but 60 yards inside and waving him to come were his grandma and grandpa. Both of them were wearing clothing similar to what they wore on Earth, and they appeared to be the age they were when they died. Still, Grandma and Grandpa looked like no other 85-year-olds I have ever seen walking around here. I kid you not. Had I thrown a football pass at them, both of them gave the impression they could have easily jumped up and snatched it. 6 So even though people may look the ages when we would best recognize them, they also seem young and vibrant, or in some cases, older. I saw a bright light very quickly, another NDR relates, and then a beach, and then I saw my mom and daughter, who died at age 2, standing on the beach. My daughter was grown up. 7 others seemed to indicate that even though people in heaven looked their age, somehow they also appeared ageless, or in their prime. Dr. Long reports how Bob fell out of a building and landed 3 stories below. During his NDE he met many deceased relatives. My relatives, all deceased, were there, all at their prime in life. They were dressed, I would say, 1940s style, which would have been prime years for most. Relatives I knew of, such as my grandfathers, but never knew in life were there, as well as uncles/aunts who passed before I knew them. 8 Another NDR notes, suddenly I recognized all these relatives. They were all around 35 years old, including the little brother I'd never known, because he had died during the war when he was 2 years old. 9 Doctors tell us our earthly bodies grow and develop until sometime in our late 20s or early 30s, then we begin our slow decay. Maybe that's our heavenly age. Or maybe, in heaven we will be known for our true identity and our projected form can be perceived or seen in different ways. Airline Captain Dale Black noticed that he saw them for who they were. None were skinny, none overweight. None were crippled, none were bent or broken. None were old, none were young. If I had to guess, I would say they appeared to be somewhere around 30 years old. Although some form of time does seem to exist in heaven, no one aged. 10-something University professor Howard Storm described during his NDE may give insight into the appearance of age in heaven. Brilliant beings of light he called the saints and angels came to meet him and said, "We can appear to you in our human form if you wish or in any form you want, so you will be comfortable with us." Storm answered, "No. Please, you're more beautiful than anything I've ever seen." 11 So maybe in heaven we will be known for our true identity and our outer appearance can adapt to the needs of others. Steve Miller noted this from his studies. People seem to consist of something more akin to energy than cells. This could explain why, when one NDR expressed surprise that her deceased relative looked so old, the relative explained that she could appear however she wanted and immediately changed to a younger look. 12 Maybe our appearance of age can change in the intermediate heaven. I'm not sure what that would imply for our resurrected body's age in the new heaven and earth. My vote is 29. One day we will know for sure. New family values. One thing you don't need to worry about in heaven: family feuds. In heaven, what Jesus taught us to pray will always be true. Father in heaven, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Matthew 6 verse 10, italics mine. Our will be done has ruined earth, so only those surrendered to letting God be God instead of trying to play God can be allowed in heaven. Otherwise, we'd ruin it too. Just because people get a peek at heaven does not mean heaven is automatically their permanent residence. We'll talk more about why in later chapters. But God will have new family values that will make all the relational challenges of earth fade away. First, communication will be perfect. Nothing will be hidden in heaven. Brian was born totally deaf, but at age 10 he nearly drowned. In his NDE, he said, "I approached the boundary. No explanation was necessary for me to understand, at the age of 10, that once I cross, the boundary, I could never come back, period. I was more than thrilled to cross. I intended to cross, but my ancestors over another boundary caught my attention. They were talking in telepathy, which caught my attention. I was born profoundly deaf and had all hearing family members, all of which knew sign language. I could read or communicate with about 20 ancestors of mine and others through telepathic methods. It overwhelmed me. I could not believe how many people I could telepathize with simultaneously. Point 13 Although we will be able to talk and sing with our voices in heaven, most indicate the preferred way of communicating with God, angels, and people will be directly heart to heart. God tells the prophet Isaiah about heaven's communication, saying, "Before they call, I will answer, while they are still speaking I will hear." Isaiah 65 verse 24. People describe this in different ways, but it's uncanny how consistently NDRs describe this nonverbal, perfect communication in heaven. Crystal describes it this way: there was instant and complete communication between us. What do I mean by that? Imagine a password that, if you let me use it, gives me instant access to everything you've ever said or thought or felt or written or believed in your life, past, present, and future. Instantly, I would have a more complete understanding of you than is possible on Earth. Well, that is what this was like. There was no room whatsoever for secrets or shame or misunderstanding or anything negative. There was just this wonderful, beautiful, nourishing sense of knowing. Point 14 Some seem to indicate that one of the rules of heaven is no invading people's thoughts without their permission. Dean states, when beings wanted to communicate, generally they did so through thought only. Because everything is alive, everything can communicate so that you experience the communication, you don't just hear it. There was no miscommunication, no misunderstandings. There was nothing you would hide from one another, every thought was pure. There was a rule that you did not go into any other's thoughts without them giving you permission to do so. Point 15 It's like Jesus said, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, implying this direct-to-mind communicating from God, proclaim from the roofs. Matthew 10 verses 26 to 27. In this perfect place, all the evils and deceptions of lying, hiding, and covering the truth must be left behind. But it's not that voices cannot be used. Betty Malls recalls joining in singing wonderful songs harmonized in many languages. The voices not only burst forth in more than 4 parts, but they were in different languages. I was awed by the richness and perfect blending of the words, and I could understand them. I do not know why this was possible except that I was part of a universal experience. Communication between us was through the projection of thoughts. We all seemed to be on some universal wavelength. I thought at the time, I will never forget the melody and these words. But later I could only recall 2, Jesus and redeemed. 16 May they be one. With perfect communication and perfect love comes perfect unity. The very thing Jesus prayed that we would learn to experience more and more on earth will happen fully in heaven's family. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. John 17 verses 20 to 23. In heaven, Jesus' prayer is tangibly felt by all. Captain Dale Black describes it, the best unity I have ever felt on earth did not compare with the exhilarating oneness that I experienced with my spiritual family in heaven. This love, God's love, was transforming. To experience something so sacred, so profound as the boundless love of God was the most thrilling part of heaven. 17 Jeff Olson reflected on his experience, saying, we were all connected pieces in a huge puzzle of oneness. Words Jesus had said rushed to my recollection, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren ye have done it unto me. Was he talking about the awareness I was experiencing? Did he feel the same thing I was feeling? Was this how he walked the earth, in the consciousness of knowing each individual soul at this deep level of love? We are all linked and equal in God's eyes. I was seeing it, feeling it, and experiencing it. Point 18 Instead of just hearing the music and the thousands of voices praising God, I had become part of the choir, Don Piper recalls. I was one with them, and they had absorbed me into their midst. 19 Harvard neurosurgeon Eben Alexander describes in his near-death experience remaining distinct, not a Buddhist oneness where you lose your distinct personhood, but the oneness Jesus described. Seeing and hearing were not separate in this place where I now was. I could hear the visual beauty of the silvery bodies of those scintillating, angelic, beings above, and I could see the surging, joyful perfection of what they sang. It seemed that you could not look at or listen to anything in this world without becoming a part of it, without joining with it in some mysterious way. Everything was distinct, yet everything was also a part of everything else, like the rich and intermingled designs on a Persian carpet. Point 20 The only way this perfect family unity, oneness, and communication is made possible, heaven has no room for sin. Dale Black recalls this epiphany. Part of the joy I was experiencing was not only the presence of everything wonderful but the absence of everything terrible. There was no strife, no competition, no sarcasm, no betrayal, no deception, no lies, no murders, no unfaithfulness, no disloyalty, nothing contrary to the light and life and love. The absence of sin was something you could feel. There was no shame, because there was nothing to be ashamed of. There was no sadness, because there was nothing to be sad about. There was no need to hide, because there was nothing to hide from. It was all out in the open. Point 21 The family restored. Jeff Olson was back in heaven. I danced and ran, feeling so joyful, and I marveled at the indescribable beauty around me. It was vast and open and beautiful. I could feel, touch, and taste everything as if I had not 5 but 50 senses. It was amazing. Jeff had struggled in months of recovery after the tragic auto accident. He blamed himself and felt intense despair over losing Tamara and baby Griffin. He struggled to let them go, wanting to die and be with them, yet knowing he needed strength to stay and father 4-year-old Spencer. At a low point in his recovery, he had another experience of heaven. As I walked, on 2 healthy strong legs, I entered into a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway was a baby crib. I rushed to the crib, and peeking in, saw something beyond joyful. There lying in the crib was my son. It was little Griffin. He was alive and well. He slept so peacefully. I looked at him and took in every detail. How his chubby little hands lay so peacefully beside his perfect face, how his hair lay gently across the tops of his ears. I reached into the crib and swept him up into my arms. I could feel the warmth from his little body. I could feel his breath on my neck and the smell of his delicate hair. He was so familiar and so alive. I held him close and cried tears of joy as I laid my cheek against his soft little head as we had always done. It was Griffin. He was alive, and I was with him, holding him in this wonderful place. I felt something or someone move up behind me. The feeling coming from this being was so powerful and yet so loving that it almost startled me. I felt light and love engulf me. I knew my wife and son were gone. They had died months earlier, but time didn't exist where I was at that moment. Rather than having them ripped away from me, I was being given the opportunity to actually hand them over to God. To let them go in peace, love, and gratitude. Everything suddenly made sense. Everything had divine order. I could give my son to God and not have him taken away from me. I held my baby son as God himself held me. I experienced the oneness of all of it, the being behind me inviting me to let it all go and give Griffin to him. In all that peace and knowledge, I hugged my little boy tightly one last time, kissed him on the cheek, and gently laid him back down in the crib. I willingly gave him up. No one would ever take him away from me again. He was mine. We were one, and I was one with God. Griffin was alive in a place more real than anything here. Point 22 That's heaven. Life, love, together again, everything restored and alive in a place more beautiful than you can imagine. Let's imagine just how beautiful it will be.